In this hints and tips video, we're looking at the negative effects of climate change. Whenever you're looking at a resource, obviously you're going to have a look down here at the key to see what the different colours mean. Ensure you understand that these numbers are in percentage. 2007, talking about importers and exporters of wheat. So the questions: which three countries are the world's biggest exporters of wheat? Well, if you've understood this and the title, obviously you'll be able to pick them out. Write them down. Ensure you include a unit. What would happen if the climate in these countries becomes less suitable for wheat production? Well, there's an obvious answer, and you can say, I would expect it to decrease. I would expect their production of wheat to decrease. And if their production of wheat decreases, what will that do to the amount they export? Note that we're not talking about an amount as in a number of tons, we're talking about a percentage of world exports. What we can also think about is, well, if they export less as a percentage of the wheat moving around the international markets, who's going to replace that? Which countries may actually end up producing more? If there's less wheat about in general, which may actually be the case, how does that affect these major importers of wheat? How does that affect the Indonesians or the Japanese if the price of wheat is going up? So while, it's really easy to come up with a simple one-line answer to question 2, I'd advise you to go for it in a bit more depth. Right, looking at figure 2, what's the point of this? Well, we're trying to get a comparison between these so we can say that we know which state is which. We're also having a look down here at this scale at the bottom, so we can see that we're talking about precipitation change in a percentage. So we're heading from 0, which is precipitation as it has been over the last few years, and now we're saying that if it's brown, the darker brown it is, the more the drop in precipitation. As it gets darker in the blue, the more rainfall they're getting compared to recent history. Right, in italics here we have a statement. Dry conditions predicted to cause lower yields for cereal farmers, that includes wheat. Wetter conditions are likely to produce better yields. Particularly importantly here we have warmer, wetter conditions expected to produce better yields. It's obviously a generalization. Using this information and with reference to figure 2, note it's telling you to have reference to figure 2 here. So you have to say from figure 2 and say something about the resource. Explain how the impact of climate change will differ for Texas and North Dakota. Because this question is quite structured, you've got to respond to it in a similar way. You've got to talk about, this is the case in Texas, this is the case in North Dakota. You have to make it very clear that you're referring to the resource, and you have to explain the difference. You've got to say why the effect of climate change, the impact of climate change will be different from one state to another. Let's have a look at that one first. Well, you're probably going to talk about the fact that from figure 2 we can see that Texas is going to get drier. A good answer is going to say it's going to get drier, and it's going to say how much drier. Here we've got -5%. So precipitation is likely to drop by about 5%. Here it's the second shade of blue, so we're up into more than 10% increase in rainfall up here. Remember what that place was called? Up here is North Dakota. So up in North Dakota we're expecting more than 10% increase in rainfall. By quoting the data you're kind of demonstrating that you're really using the resource. So how does that change the impact of climate change on each of these states? Well, if we just accept that statement at the beginning that said drier conditions will reduce yield, warmer, wetter conditions will increase yield? Well, of course, the whole map is likely to get warmer because of climate change, because of global warming. But as this area is getting drier and this area is getting wetter, well, we'll expect this area of North Dakota to produce more wheat. So while this area drying out is kind of moving away from the natural optimum for wheat production, so these areas maybe can't produce wheat anymore, up here in North Dakota, these are going to be better cereal producing conditions. They will make more wheat, if you like. They'll produce more wheat. The next question is asking you to appreciate the trend. If we head from the southern states of the US, as we head north through the US, through the plains, into the northern states, into North Dakota, it's getting wetter and wetter. So what's going to happen as we cross the border? We can see a little hint of it here, even wetter. Also, as it gets warmer up here, it'll have more of an impact. Milder spring, milder autumn will mean that their growing season will be longer. The period when the soil is frozen will be shorter. So they'll be able to fit in more crops maybe, or at least there'll be a longer growing period. So if the US is predicted to produce less wheat because these areas down here are becoming further from the moving further from the optimum for wheat production, you've got to predict how that's going to impact further north, where now it's warmer, so they have a longer growing season and wetter. This is a mystery exercise. Why can't Toani go to the movies? Well, here we're trying to work out why a Kiribati, a person from Kiribati, who seems to have moved to New Zealand, we've got evidence further in here that he's moved to New Zealand to live with his cousin, as it suggests down here. Why can't he go to the movies? Obviously we don't care that he can't specifically go to the movies, but an inability to do something that is a luxury, not a particularly expensive luxury, would suggest that he doesn't have a lot of money. So why is an Kiribati living in New Zealand without a lot of money? Apparently they have a shortage of construction workers and telecoms engineers, so surely he should be able to find a job. Well, as you read through all of this data, what you're looking to find out is why someone from Kiribati would be looking to leave their home. You need to be thinking about what the link is between this person's migration and climate change, because that's what this lesson is all about. You need to be thinking about why that movement is going to make life for him difficult in somewhere like New Zealand. Here we're looking at a couple of different reasons for partially why climate change is affecting sea levels, also why in some areas of the world they're much more vulnerable. But specifically here we're looking at island nations that are relatively low-lying. We can also be thinking about the fact that people from certain areas of the world may have specific skill sets. In this box here you can see what Tani knows how to do, and you can think about whether or not that matches the skill set currently required in Canterbury. Once you've done that exercise to kind of introduce you to the idea, you need to define the term environmental refugee. You can look up a definition of refugee, you can look up a definition of environmental refugee, of course, but what you really want to do is come up with your own. What is a refugee? How can someone define themselves as refugee, as an environmental refugee? A number of countries won't accept the term environmental refugee. Is this because they don't exist, or is this because too many of them are likely to exist and nobody wants to take responsibility for allowing them all in? If you go to most countries and claim to be a refugee, you're being chased out of your country because there's a war, because you can't survive there. Countries have a certain obligation to look after you, so if you can claim to be an environmental refugee, it could allow you to move into countries that otherwise might be legally allowed to refuse you entry. And in this question, thinking about what you've learned on the previous slide, about Tuani and the people of Kiribati, you need to explain why countries like Kiribati and the Maldives are particularly vulnerable to sea level rise. If you don't know that by this stage, you should do some background research. There's a lot in the textbook that will help you. Now, we've got two reasons for sea level rise, and you in this section just need to arrange these statements into the appropriate boxes over here. You should be redrawing this flow diagram and organizing the answers. Basically, down one side you're going to be looking at information to do with the melting of ice that is on land, the Greenland ice sheet in the main, and on this side we're talking about thermal expansion. You now need to watch this video about Disco Bay in Greenland. Try and remember the term Disco Bay. Try and remember the name of the place, Disco Bay, Greenland. So when you're in an exam and you're writing about it, you can be really precise about the location. You're talking about Disco Bay, Disco Bay, Disco Bay in Greenland. Remember it, keep it in your head. When you're taking notes on the video, do it in this table. Disco Bay is not going to just lose out due to climate change, although in the short term, most of the impacts are going to fit over here in the negative column. We've got men who used to go out fishing, who used to hunt on the ice. It's a very sort of macho industries, and now they can't do this. In many cases, they're just on welfare or government benefits because their previous occupations, the previous things that also kind of define them culturally as Inuits, these are no longer available. And so that causes social problems as well as economic ones. It's also changing the environment of the area. But there may be some positive impacts of the retreat of the ice. Well, there's more land that you can access. If the ice goes back, you can see all of those rocks. Maybe some of those rocks will be useful. Is that going to have a positive social impact? In this section, you might want to kind of predict what might happen. Right, some of this terminology here is going to be a little complicated, but you do need to be able to discuss the idea of coral bleaching and what happens to corals as the temperature of the sea rises. It turns out that corals are quite sensitive, that they are a symbiotic organism. So you've got the coral, which is an animal, but you've got the algae, which is a plant, and they stop operating together at higher temperatures. So you need to watch the video and have a go at the questions. Down here we've got some summaries. You should be able to complete these summaries straight away yourself. If you can't do that, I suggest you go back and try and work through the PowerPoint again. And that's it.